Hi, everyone. Welcome to this year's National Convention Delegate Report. Um, I'm Sana. I'm the delegate from the Southern Central Valley unit, which is Fresno, Visalia, Mariposa, Madera area. And in consultation with the Fresno LSA this year, I thought I would try recording a presentation and sending it to all of you. That way, it would be an attempt to reach more and more people. You can watch it on your own time. So there's a benefit to that. Of course, there's a limitation to it because it cuts down on the questions and the conversation that we could have if we were doing this live on Zoom. But please feel free to reach out to me anytime you'd like to chat. I'm happy to chat anytime. So each year, National Convention is an exciting and inspiring event. There are 171 elected delegates from across the nation representing the diversity of both the Baha'i community and the general American society. And we come together to share insights about the progress of the Divine Plan and to elect the National Spiritual Assembly. A few years ago, the national conventions had been put on pause due to COVID. So 2020, 2021, there was no national convention. It resumed in 2022, but it was only open to delegates and not guests, which was the same last year and this year as well. So over the past 3 years, the atmosphere has become a lot more intimate. It's just the delegates that come together. And it feels like basically this large extended family that has a family reunion once a year. And just like any family, there are inevitable tensions and frustrations that arise due to diversity of perspectives, diversity of experiences. But just like a family, the only thing that enables us to overcome these challenges is love. And I feel like this year's convention marked a pivotal moment in that the collective consciousness of the delegates achieved a heightened level of mutual understanding, particularly around the topic of racial prejudice, which is a theme that's ever present throughout the entirety of the convention's consultations. So this year, the delegates were able to speak about it in a frank and loving manner. They have been speaking about it in a frank and loving manner in prior years, but this year it was even more. And within the kind of the intimate and the loving atmosphere of the convention, perspectives were exchanged, understanding was advanced. It's nice to remind ourselves of where we are at in history. The purpose of Baha'u'llah's revelation is to bring about a new race of humanity, a mature humanity, and bring about a new world civilization. But that takes time and it goes through stages. At every stage, progress takes place through the interaction of three elements of society: the individual, the community, and the institutions. And at various points throughout the history of the Divine Plan, which began with Abdu'l-Baha's Tablets of the Divine Plan written during World War I, and then the Divine Plan formally began under the plans of Shoghi Effendi in 1937. At various points in the history of the Divine Plan, there has been more focus or emphasis on raising the capacity of individual believers, of developing the community, or of building the institutions. But now we've gotten to a point in our history where we've learned so much over the past 100 years that we can make an impact on society as a whole. And thus the House of Justice has said that this series of global plans that started just a few years ago, that we're now in, has as its single aim the release of the society-building powers of the faith. So that's kind of the aim for the Divine Plan that we're now, the stage of the Divine Plan that we're in now, which on the chart you see the 9-year plan is in red down there, but you can see the history of the Divine Plan and just thinking back over the century of how much we've learned and how much experience we've gained. The House of Justice has been reminding us of our historic mission since its inception. And just almost 10 years ago in 2016, they wrote, "The movement of your clusters to the farthest frontiers of learning will usher in the time anticipated by Shoghi Effendi at the start of your collective exertions, when the communities you build will directly combat and eventually eradicate the forces of corruption, moral laxity, and of ingrained prejudice eating away the vitals of society." And so, just last year in November of 2023, the House of Justice said that In the Advent of Divine Justice, Shoghi Effendi explained to the Baha'is of America that given the restricted size of their community and the limited influence it wielded, they must focus at that time, 1939, on its own growth and development as it learned to apply the teachings. He promised, however, that the time would come when they would be called upon to engage their fellow citizens in a process of working for the healing and betterment of their nation. That time has now come. And it has come not only for the Baha'is of America, but for the Baha'is of the world, as the society-building power inherent in the faith is released in ever greater measures. So all our contributions to the building of this world civilization is stage by stage. And we're in this exciting 9-year plan stage now. So let's look at the various aspects of the 9-year plan and how each of them releases the society-building power of the faith. The 9-year plan was outlined to us by the House of Justice in the 30 December 2021 message. And that message has 6 different sections. These sections were the basis for the agenda during National Convention, and it was the basis for the consultations and deliberations of the delegates during National Convention. So I just gave a couple comments on that 3rd section, contributing to social transformation, because that's really the context of the whole divine plan, where we're trying to contribute to the transformation of society. And like I just mentioned, the House of Justice said that, when we already wrote that in Divine Justice, in 1939, the Baha'i community wasn't ready yet. It hadn't grown in size and it hadn't achieved enough capacity. But now, almost 100 years later, we have reached that stage where we can make a meaningful contribution to social transformation. But I'll give a couple comments on each of the other sections as well, these other 5 sections we have. So we'll start with that first one, the movement of clusters. So in order to release the society-building powers of faith, we have to build communities. The way we measure the development of our communities is through a few milestones. And just like as parents, for those of you who are parents, when we're raising children, we celebrate certain milestones. We celebrate a child's first steps, their first words, their first tooth falling out, graduation from various schools at different stages. But these milestones are just moments in time. They're moments in a very long developmental process. It's often windy. It's full of side steps and missteps and sometimes backward steps, but then mainly forward steps. And same with the development of our communities as well. House of Justice has described in great detail these 3 milestones that we have, but they also have given a summary of them in one paragraph. And these stages or these milestones, they can apply to a cluster, but also they can apply to our local community. They can apply to smaller units like a neighborhood or even a group of families that we're working with or that we're friends with. So they describe the 3 milestones kind of in summary in this way. At first, there are a handful of individuals who are promoting the community building process. And the participants come from a few groups. So that's the first milestone. Then at some point in the second milestone, there are 10 or 20 or 30 individuals active in the work of expansion and consolidation, and maybe around 100 who are participating. So that sounds very familiar. I think that's a familiar reality to us all. And that's the second milestone. Then the third milestone is when there are more than 100 serving, and those 100 are connected to many hundreds, like even 1,000 maybe. And by serving, we can mean many things. Of course, tutoring a study circle, hosting a devotional. These are definitely ways in which people serve, but also helping with service projects, doing home visits regularly, teaching the faith to others, having meaningful conversations, and contributing to Baha'i community life in other ways. These are all ways people can serve. And in all of these ways that people serve, it connects them to others in their day-to-day interactions. So you can see how things can grow pretty quickly when we think about all the different ways people can serve and all the different people they're connected with. In the first milestone, we maybe focus on promoting core activities. Then in the second milestone, by inviting more and more people to be active in expansion. And then finally, the third milestone, by supporting the services of everyone. In California, we see on the right there, we have around a dozen clusters at the third milestone. Most of them are at the second milestone, and then a handful are still at the first milestone, and they're working to intensify the pattern of action. And then we have the map here of the entire country and kind of a breakdown of first, second, third milestone clusters. There's definitely a nice, healthy advancement and progression with the movement of clusters. So this year, this was kind of cool. The National Center provided stats for each of the units and then emailed it to each of the delegates. So I got this email with these stats for our unit. So our unit, again, is Visalia, Fresno, Madera, Mariposa areas. We have over 100 core activities, over 110 core activities, but that's only what's being reported. So I'm sure there's many, many more that just have not made it to the report. And one thing that's really nice is that over 50%, so around, it says on the report, around 55% of the participants in our core activities are not enrolled Baha'is. So that means we have a healthy, meaningful engagement with the wider community. And then regarding the Baha'i community, looks like around 50% of the registered Baha'i children are in children's classes, and a third of the registered Baha'i juniors are in the junior program, which is nice. That's a good amount. I mean, of course, there's room to grow, but that's a nice amount. So we'll go on to the next section now, which is learning from the most advanced clusters. So of course, one of the most prominent features of the culture of the worldwide Baha'i community right now is that we're in a learning mode. So we're constantly sharing insights with others based on our action and our experiences. And we're also hearing insights from other places and seeing how we can apply them in our own reality. Last year, I was able to visit a neighborhood in the south of Brazil, which is, it's the most advanced cluster in the Western Hemisphere right now. It was featured in the World Center's film, An Expansive Prospect, which the website there is at the bottom of the screen to check out that video. The video came out, I think, a couple years ago, and there were actually a handful of delegates who made this visit to Brazil, and then there's also other delegates who made visits to other advanced places outside our country, like some went to Ottawa, Canada, which is the most advanced cluster in North America, and some went to Sydney, Australia, and some went to Delhi in India, and which is very advanced. And then, of course, there's delegates from all over the United States, or delegates from the most advanced clusters in the United States as well, including North Carolina, which is also featured in the film Expansive Prospect. The Expansive Prospect film features, I think, 4 places in the world. So one is in North Carolina, another is in the south of Brazil. So a few delegates shared some of their insights from what they've learned and experienced from these advanced places, and a few things commonly stood out. So I'll share a couple points. The friends serving in these advanced places are very conscious that we are engaged in a process of transformation. We're not just doing activities, we're not just doing good service, we're engaged in a process of transformation, both social and spiritual transformation. And this takes place through contact with the Word of God. The Institute is the instrument that enables large numbers to come into contact with the Word of God, to reflect on it, to apply it, to share it with others. So seeing the Institute in this way, as an instrument of social and spiritual transformation, really helps open up our conceptions about what we can do. And this gives us more flexibility in how the Institute can take root in a community. We don't need to be so concerned about making sure all the elements are there right away, or that it looks a certain way, or it happens a certain way, or we do things the right way. In fact, we shouldn't even think about things as mistakes. Rather, they're just steps along a path of learning. In fact, it could be when something looks a little bit different than what we expect, it could actually be the beginning of a new learning that we just haven't seen before, we haven't learned yet. So we can think of these core activities as seeds. Seeds start very small, but they grow over time. And when we put seeds in the soil, we don't just put them there and leave them alone, or we'll lose track of them. We don't just throw them on the ground and walk away. We have to place every single seed, and we have to count them. We have to keep track of them. Even if it hasn't sprouted yet, we have to nurture it, and we have to count them and water them. And we have to have faith in the capacity that over time they will grow and they'll transform the landscape around them. But it definitely is a nurturing process. So this helps us be conscious that the Institute is not something that we do for others. There's not a us and them type thing. It's actually an instrument that belongs to the entire population. So from the very start, everyone can be a protagonist. in studying or applying or sharing the institute. Like if we ask a mother to teach her own children some of the materials from the children's class materials, like studying a quote, learning a song, doing a coloring sheet, and let's say we ask her to do that weekly, well, she's a children's class teacher and she's a protagonist of the institute. She's a collaborator, and we can consult with her and we can treat her the way we would treat any Baha'i teacher. So in this way, and everyone can be a protagonist from the start, even junior youth. Junior youth also help assist with children's classes, and so we can treat them as kind of protagonists of the institute from the start. So one more point is that we live in a very materialistic culture. As Baha'is, that doesn't mean we're greedy for $1 million cars or yachts or things like that. Generally, as Baha'is, we're conscious of the materialism around us, and so we protect ourselves against this kind of obvious or crass materialism, it's called. But there are subtle effects of materialism that maybe we're less conscious of, and they affect everyone, rich and poor, Baha'i, not Baha'i. And one of the subtle effects of materialism is that we have this mindset of scarcity. We think things are scarce in our society. We think we think human resources are scarce. How often have we all thought we just don't have enough human resources for this? Or we think money is scarce, and that really affects sometimes our perception about contributing to the fund. But especially we think of the scarcity of time. Everyone in the society is always rushed, and we always think we just don't have enough time. But what we've observed in these more advanced places is that the more one serves and becomes a protagonist, the more one wants to serve even more. Because if one isn't serving, they feel it. They feel the lack of blessings. But if they are serving in their own community, with their own neighbors, with people in their lives, well, then they adjust their lives to give more time. They'll rearrange things because it's something important to their hearts. It's something they believe in. It's for their own family. It's for their own children. And they see the small glimpses of transformation as they serve. So again, it's not an us or them thing. It's not that we as Baha'is need to ask others to give more time to service, but we simply focus on creating a culture that awakens the desire for service in everyone. And this culture directly combats forces of materialism bombarding society, especially the youth and the junior youth. The best way to protect young people from the forces of materialism is to allow them to give more time to serve. But of course, this applies to all ages. The more we enable people to give their time to service, the more we're protected from materialism. Okay, so now the next section of the 9-year plan is about the Training Institute, educational endeavors in the Training Institute. So of course, we know that the Institute is central to everything we do in the Divine Plan. And that's because it's a process of capacity building through education. Paul himself has said, regard man as a mine, rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So the Institute is the instrument through which populations can systematically access spiritual education. And we're in this process of transformation. And of course, transformation takes place through interaction with the Word of God, and the Institute is the instrument through which populations can interact with the Word of God systematically. So one analogy I've heard is that, historically, in the past, many countries had high illiteracy rates throughout the world. Literacy was confined to a select group of people, maybe the upper class or the clergy or merchants, something like that. And at some point in history, countries decided, each country in their own time, but governments decided to abolish illiteracy. And therefore, governments took steps to establish a school system to promote literacy. And so at that point in whatever country's history that happened, education went from being mainly a family-based homeschool system to a public education system. And that's as an analogy, the Baha'i community is doing the same thing with spiritual literacy. So we see around the world right now that there is rampant spiritual illiteracy. And so we want to develop a system to abolish spiritual literacy or to promote spiritual literacy. So we're developing a system of spiritual education for the whole society, and we're building it at the grassroots level upwards, and with the help of more and more people. So maybe it would be helpful, let me go on a tangent a little bit, share a bit about the history of the Institute, just so we have some context for thinking about it through the future of this plan and beyond. So during the 10-year crusade, as you see on the map here, Baha'is went to nearly all the countries and territories of the world at the time to try to establish the faith. At the start of the 10-year crusade in 1953, there were 12 national spiritual assemblies. Basically, they were all, they were in the Middle East and India, they were in Europe and North America and Australia. So basically the West and also, the Middle East where the faith began. But by the end of the 10-year crusade, in 1963, there was 56 national spiritual assemblies. And now they're representing basically the rest of the world. So Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific all had their own national assemblies. And so in these parts of the world, the pioneers who went there, mainly of Persian or Middle Eastern or Western backgrounds, encountered a receptivity that they hadn't experienced before. So they were used to maybe ones or twos becoming Baha'is, at least in the West. But here, when they went out pioneering, groups would embrace the faith. And so it took a while for the faith to be established in these places. But by the 1960s and definitely by the 1970s, the Baha'i world witnessed the beginnings of entry by troops in these parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Of course, this expansion in these parts of the world brought about many challenges. First, there was the need for human resource development to attend to all this growth. But then mainly, there were cultural challenges, both cultural challenges between the pioneers and the indigenous people, such as styles of communication, methods of administration and organization, even conceptions about time. These all became kind of these cultural challenges, but also there were cultural challenges of the society themselves, such as the status of women, poverty, illiteracy, different social conventions, prejudice, war, lack of infrastructure, these types of societal challenges also. So these challenges brought about a learning process. And so early on during that period of the 1960s, the House of Justice emphasized that expansion and consolidation had to go hand in hand, but that we had to learn about it. We had to learn how to do these two things together. And they introduced the concept of the Institute then in the 1960s, and it was something that the Baha'i world was learning about. We were learning how to have expansion consolidation go hand in hand sustainably. And so each place was kind of trying their own thing, and the House of Justice was kind of surveying the entire Baha'i world and seeing it as a large laboratory to learn about entry by troops. And so the House of Justice wrote that it is safe to say that during these years, there was virtually no type of teaching activity, no combination of expansion, consolidation, and proclamation, no administrative option, no effort at cultural adaptation that was not being energetically tried in some part of the Baha'i world. So throughout the entire Baha'i world, everything was being tried. The net result of the experience was an intensive education on a great part of the Baha'i community in the implications of the mass teaching work. By its nature, the process was largely local and regional in focus, qualitative rather than quantitative in gains, and incremental rather than large scale in the progress achieved. But had it not been for the painstaking, always difficult, and often frustrating consolidation work pursued during these years, subsequent strategy of systematizing the promotion of entry by troops would have had very little with which to work. So it was in this context of rapid mass expansion and then kind of a difficult, frustrating consolidation that we were learning about that the Institute kind of emerged. So over the decades, by the time the 90s arrived, the House of Justice was able to see across the entire Baha'i world that the Ruhi Institute's approach to education resulted in sustainable expansion and consolidation. And so the House of Justice encouraged the entire Baha'i world to learn about it. And then another decade passed. And then in 2005, the House of Justice officially adopted the Ruhi Institute as the institute curriculum for the Baha'i world because it fuels this ever-expanding, self-sustaining system for spiritual education of a population. Individuals proceed through the courses, they engage in the corresponding activities. These activities, in turn, increase the number of people who are brought into the educational system, therefore the entire system expands. But also these same activities are the basis for the development of community life. So you have both human resource development and community life going hand in hand, which is kind of what we've been trying to achieve. So the history of the Institute is one of responding to the needs of the divine plan through education, through interaction with the Word of God, through developing capacity for service. So as the divine plan now enters a new phase, we are viewing the Institute in an expanded view. Previously, we thought about it in terms of community building, which we still do. But now also we're viewing it in terms of society building, releasing the society building power of faith. And so just like at some point, governments went from homeschool system of education to a system of structured public education, the Institute is now learning not only how to have study circles in homes, which we'll continue to have, and other informal spaces like parks, but we also want to create an enhanced educational organization. So one analogy that I've heard before is that we want more and more people to have vegetable gardens in their home, but we also want to learn about kind of systematic, larger scale agriculture. The dynamics of plant growth are the same, whether you're tending to your own vegetable garden in your backyard or whether you're growing crops in a long row. The way the plants grow are the same, but it's just a different level of systematization. So same with education. I mean, the relationships of individuals together are the same. The interaction of someone with the Word of God is the same, but and we want more and more kind of informal study circles at home, but we also want an educational organization. So to that end, there are a handful of places in California that now have commercial institute facilities where every day there are junior youth groups, study circles taking place after school with middle schoolers, high schoolers, college-age students, young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults, everyone. And so we have these we're starting to build these educational organizations. For us here, this will be the last point on the Institute. For us here in the Central Valley, our focus really should be to master the capacities of book 1 and book 2, Ruhi books 1 and book 2, because that's the foundation of our community life. And that's how the process of transformation manifests itself in a community. Books 1 and 2 are not just about activities. They're about creating patterns of community life, about meaningful conversations, about prayers, home visits, about creating a spiritual environment in which more and more people feel like they can embrace the revelation with relative ease. And so in essence, we're building a Baha'i culture in which all aspects of a life of service are connected. And the foundation of this Baha'i culture are the capacities we gain from books 1 and book 2. And so the more we understand and appreciate what's in those first 2 books, the content of the books, the more we can correlate it to the lives and the interests of any person we encounter, whether they're Baha'i or not. We all are looking for a community life. And so the more we know books 1 and book 2, the more we can engage people in conversations on spiritual themes. And at the heart of that conversation is the Word of God, which will promote this process of transformation. So the second to last section is about raising capacity for administration at all levels. And so just a quick note on, so at the National Convention, we had 2 of our counselors there, Counselor Natasha Bruce and Counselor Billy Silva. And their comments really helped frame the consultations during the convention. And so we were very fortunate to have 2 members of the Continental Board of Counselors with us. So as you know, the administration of the faith is roughly composed of the appointed institutional counselors, which advises and guides individuals and institutions at all levels, but then also the elected bodies and their agencies, local assemblies, regional councils, national assembly. And it's these elected bodies that the House of Justice has repeatedly emphasized their development in the plan messages. And so we could talk a little bit about their development. So regarding the development of elected institutions, the House of Justice writes, this is a quote here, one compelling insight which has emerged is that the extent to which the station and leadership of a local assembly is recognized in a community is related to how deeply the believers appreciate the sacredness of the electoral process and their duty to participate in it, in an atmosphere wholly free from the taint of suasion or worldly attitudes about power. As consciousness is raised in the community about the spiritual principles underlying Baha'i elections, a new conception is formed of what it means for someone to be called to serve on an institution. And understanding grows of how the individual, the community, and the local assembly and its agencies relate to one another. Where systematic effort has been made to stimulate conversations in a community about the formation of the local assembly and its purpose, and to sustain these conversations year after year, the strength of the elected body and the dynamism of community life reinforce each other. So this, of course, applies to any Baha'i election, not just that of a local assembly. It applies equally to the election of the regional council and the National Assembly, and of course, the Universal House of Justice. This consciousness of the sacredness of Baha'i elections is very present in National Convention. The election is surrounded by joy, surrounded by prayers and music, but there's also a sense of trust and integrity in the electoral process that's there at a convention. So, for instance, you see here in this picture, there's a clear ballot box and it's locked. It's symbolic, but it's symbolic of the integrity of the Baha'i election. And then the outcome of a sacred electoral process is the creation of a sacred institution. So here is the NSA for this year. It's the same members of last year, but it's the kind of the fruit of the sacred electoral process. So this dynamic holds true for any Baha'i election, whether the election of a local assembly in a community of only 15 people, or the regional council, all the way up to the Universal House of Justice. The process may feel practical, mechanical. It's just writing names down on paper or voting online through the online balloting system. But even though it takes place through practical means, it's really a spiritual process. But isn't that the case with everything we do in the Baha'i faith? We do things practically in our day-to-day lives, but we infuse our practical daily actions with spiritual significance. And that's especially true with our financial life as well. Our financial life feels very material, but it's actually spiritual. So this is the second aspect of administration that I'd like to talk about, is the fund. So every elected institution has a fund. There's local, regional, national, and international. And so here the House of Justice says the act of contributing to the fund then is imbued with profound meaning. It is a practical way of hastening the advent of that civilization. Previous to that sentence, they were talking about that the goal of the aim of the Baha'i faith is to bring about this spiritual, just, peaceful, and unified world civilization. And then below that, they say an important aspect of enhancing institutional capacity over the coming years will be the ongoing development of local and national funds. For this to occur, the generality of the Friends must be invited to consider afresh the responsibility of all believers to support the work of the faith through their own means, and further, to manage their financial affairs in the light of the teachings. So, probably the biggest line item right now for the fund is properties. Properties have always been a focus throughout the history of the faith. From the time of Abdul-Baha, where he was overseeing the raising up of the Shrine of the Bab and the early development of the World Center, to the time of Shoghi Effendi, as he was really developing the World Center, to today, where we're maintaining these beautiful properties. So, of course, the World Center, properties have always been a focus, but even here in America, our institutions in this country were raised up and developed kind of in parallel to the development of the House of Worship. So here you see the members of the National Spiritual Assembly sitting on the second floor outside of the unfinished Master Glaskar in Wilmette. And of course, we have many properties throughout the United States. We have our permanent schools. We see Green Acre, Nabi, Bosch, of course. There's an old picture of Green Acre, and then Bosch now is open now for day use, and plans for cabins and dorms are in the works. Actually, the National Assembly has hundreds of properties that it owns and maintains, and it's a huge expense. And I know at the regional level, property-related expenses is about half of our budget, of the regional's budget. So around 14,000 individuals gave around 23 million directly to the national fund last year. And here's a graph of kind of the amounts by age. The majority of those individuals are in their 60s and 70s. So as we advance our community building process, we have to make sure that we continually educate our younger generation about the importance of giving to the fund and of not falling into those materialistic traps that were mentioned earlier. The best way to do this is to encourage young adults, young people in general, to be active in the Institute. And then they'll learn about how giving to the fund is part of this coherent life of service. So of National's $50 million budget, 40% goes towards education and teaching. And that number has gradually risen over time. And nearly 20% goes to supporting the regional councils. Now, just to remind everyone, a contribution to the region, to the regional council is a contribution to the national. What we call the regional fund, it's actually properly termed the regional branch of the national fund. So in essence, we have a general national fund that you can give to, but then we have 13 regional national funds. Basically, we have 13 branches of the national fund. So we have the Northeast National Fund, we have the South Central National Fund, and then we have the California National Fund. California is its own region, and so we have the California Regional National Fund. So giving to the Regional Council of California is the same thing as giving to the National Fund. And then there are additional properties that are going to be up and coming soon. Like, for instance, the National Assembly is working on building a new National Archives building, which will be a dedicated building near the House of Worship that will house all the precious relics associated with the history of the faith. And of course, we have the Shrine of Abdu'l-Baha, the total cost of which is around 75 million, and nearly half of that has been contributed so far by the American Baha'i community. So clearly, we see here in America, especially here in California, we have tremendous capacity in terms of our financial resources. And as we are now in the 9-year plan, which is focused on releasing the society building powers of faith, we're going to need more and more properties. The Regional Council of California has a dedicated properties fund. It's called a facilities fund. You can find it on OCS, or you can just give to the Regional Council directly to support the properties in California. And remember, any contribution to the regional counts and is in fact a direct contribution to national as well. So finally, the last section of the 9-year plan message is about our historic mission. And the House of Justice is always reminding us about where we are in history and about our mission in the context of history. And they really highlighted this in the recent Rezai message from just a couple months ago, Rezai 2024. In the Rezai 2024 message, all these quotes are from the message. The House of Justice describes to us the urgency of the present hour. And they help us understand where we are in terms of our place in history. They note that the condition of the world is growing more desperate. And therefore, what is required is that we further extend the process of community building and effect profound social transformation. And they describe how much society is disintegrating, that there are escalating tensions between societies, within societies and between nations, affecting peoples and places in a myriad ways. We know humanity is suffering. We see it all around us, and we have to respond. The House of Justice says this demands from every conscientious soul a response. We are all too aware that the community of the greatest name cannot expect to be unaffected by the travails of society. So we can't be sad about it, but we also can't be confused. We can be concerned, but not paralyzed. And I think that's where the Baha'is have to play their part, is that we understand that society is going through these profound changes. There's a process of disintegration taking place, but also a process of integration. And so while we are affected by what's going on around us in our society, we can't be confused about it, and we can't be paralyzed. We have to act. That doesn't mean we're not aloof, We don't put away the issues of the world and say they aren't important, but rather the issues of the world should spur us on to contribute more and more to service to our communities. The House says further on in that message, the methods and instruments of the plan allow every soul to contribute a share of what humanity needs in this day. So, and then they go on to talk about how we're not working on a temporary fix. We're not working on a Band-Aid, but rather we're talking about a long-term constructive process over generations. And we won't be around to see what it'll look like in the fullness of time, but we're working on the process. We're building the system. It's not just about the end goal. The end goal is actually centuries and centuries away. So none of us will be around to see the goal, but it's really about advancing a spiritual and historic process, the divine plan. So at the convention, retired member of the Universal House of Justice, Stephen Berkland, was there. And we were fortunate enough to have him just share a couple informal comments one evening. It wasn't like a prepared talk or anything. He was just kind of sharing a few comments and some stories. And he said that he was with Dr. Varga, hand of the cause Dr. Varga, once. And he asked him, Dr. Varga, what was it like after the hand of the cause came together after the Guardian passed away in 1957? And Dr. Varga said, well, we came together and we felt like there was a thick fog in front of us. We didn't know what to do. We prayed, we consulted, we went to the shrines, we studied, we prayed day after day, same thing, day after day. And finally, the fog started to thin. And finally, fog lifted. And then at that point, we could see the mountain in front of us. Not that we could see the end, not that we could see the path now is clear, but we can now see this large mountain and how much more we have to climb. So certainly the work before us is a long-term process. It's going to be, it's a difficult process, but it's a spiritual process. And this is what the world needs. You know, all the guidance that is pouring out from the House of Justice, all these plans, all these messages, the goals, it wouldn't be coming if the world didn't need it. But it also wouldn't be coming if we weren't capable of it. The House of Justice knows our capacity. The House of Justice knows that we are up to this task. When the House of Justice writes the plan messages, like when they wrote the message for the 9-year plan, they know our capacity. And when they write this message, it's an expectation that we do have this capacity and that our capacity matches the historic moment that we are in. The House of Justice wrote, the present day capacity of the Baha'i community, combined with the discipline it has achieved through adherence to a coherent framework for action, has prepared it for an extensive, rigorous test of all its resources, spiritual as well as material. And so we are all here for this reason, to contribute to the divine plan. The Guardian says that we are in this day the chosen instruments of God's grace. If Baha'u'llah wanted others to be here instead, then others would be here. But Baha'u'llah wanted us to be here. And so it's no accident that we all find ourselves here in 2024 in the current location you're at, most likely the Central Valley if you're watching this. And we're here in the middle of the 9-year plan, contributing to the progress of the plan. It's not an accident, it's not luck or it's something like that. It's all because it's part of the divine plan. Baha'u'llah wants us to be here, and we all have a part to play. We all have a role in the unfoldment of this divine drama. We are all writing the pages of Baha'i history with our actions today. And history is part of our identity. It's part of culture. And so we are all creating a Baha'i culture through our services. Thank you so much.